Thanks for tuning in. This is Butch from Jink 3D. Today, we are going to whip up some ammo using the Nitrox 3D method created by Chip Walters. What is Nitrox 3D? Chip describes it as a collection of non-destructive techniques and strategies for creating hard surface models in Blender. Nitrox 3D is actually an acronym. It stands for Non-Destructive Iterative Techniques for Rapid Object Explorations in 3D. But what does that mean in practice? Basically, it's a philosophy and way of life, like Zen, in which you escape the shackles of destructive 3D modeling through mastery of Blender modifiers. Instead of manually manipulating primitive shapes like cubes, wedges, cylinders and spheres, you use modifiers smartly to do 99% of the heavy lifting. This tutorial is for people starting out with Blender and those who have not spent much time getting hands-on with modifiers. If you want to learn everything there is to know about Nitrox 3D, visit Chip's website or his stores on Gumroad and Blender Market. It's a paid course, but some of the lessons are free. You can also learn more about it on his YouTube channel, Discord and Patreon. You are probably wondering, what's so great about Nitrox 3D? It has many benefits, that I will explain, but for me, the biggest benefit is that I can transform, scale or change the properties of my design at any time. For example, if I need to change an object's resolution or face count late in the design process, I can. It basically gives my workflow access to a time machine. This collection of bullets was created using Nitrox 3D. Why make bullets with Nitrox 3D, when it works great for just about every kind of object under the sun? Well, a while back, I modeled some guns and I wasted a lot of time and effort working destructively with cylinders. Hopefully, this video will help others avoid such misery and pain. But with Nitrox 3D, after quickly making and perfecting the original bullet for this scene, I could easily adapt duplicates of the original to make two other completely different bullets. While the final versions of the bullets did require one of the modifiers used in the Nitrox 3D method to be applied, that was no problem. Saving some copies of the objects with no modifiers applied will facilitate subsequent revisions to my design. In this video, I will take you through the workflow for creating these bullets. You will be able to apply what you learned to any cylindrical object, such as a pencil, bottle or lightsaber. To keep the video short, I will avoid using booleans, which could be leveraged to add extra details. However, my next video will explain why Nitrox 3D is so great when it comes to booleans. Before jumping into Nitrox 3D, I would like to mention the materials used in this scene. They are part of EV Plus materials, which were also made by Chip. Personally, I think they are absolutely awesome. If you are interested, stay tuned to the final portion of the video to see me quickly stage, light, and add materials to my scene. Like many people, I learned Blender by watching tutorials. Usually, in beginner-level tutorials dealing with the creation of simple objects, such as a bullet or candlestick, the process would start with adding a primitive object that is close to the shape of the thing being modeled and then transforming it in various destructive ways. Here, I have added a cylinder, selected a number of vertices in the parameters dialog, tabbed into edit mode, added several loop cuts, moved the loop cuts up and down, scaled the loop cuts to make a bullet shape and beveled one of the loop cuts to round the projectile. Sure, the end result looks like a bullet. However, the decisions I have made, starting with the choice of vertices count at the time of the cylinder creation, and ending with the bevel, have locked me into a design that is very hard to change. If I need to change the shape, I will have to add, move, scale or remove loop cuts, and, if I need to perfect such things as the curvature of the projectile, I will need to dissolve multiple edges and replace the bevel. I might even need to delete the bullet entirely and start again. In summary, working destructively is bad. It's hard work and it will likely waste a lot of your time. Let's make a bullet using the Nitrox 3D approach. First, we add a plane. We really only need a single vertex to get started, so we tab into edit mode and merge the plane's vertices at the center. I use Machine Tools, so I could merge the vertices with Shift 1. Machine Tools is free, but if you don't use it, you can also access the merge command via the mesh menu. Next, we extrude and move the vertex repeatedly in orthographic mode to trace out the shape of the right side of a bullet. We only need one half of the bullet because a modifier will generate the rest. To trace out the shape, use the E key to extrude and the G key to move, and constrain the direction of each command by pressing the Z and X keys while dragging up or across. After a couple of minor adjustments, tab back into object mode. It does not look like much to start with, but when we add a screw modifier, the edge we have created takes the shape of a bullet. Turn on wireframe mode to examine the modified geometry. I use hard ops, so I can adjust viewport settings by hitting Alt+V. The same command is also accessible via the Viewport Overlays drop-down. Our bullet looks kind of hollow. Let's add a Solidify modifier to give it some substance. Looks pretty good, but let's tweak some options. Setting offset to 0 will tell Blender to solidify equally on both sides of our edge. Later, we will adapt this bullet using a reference image. With the solidification on both sides of the edge, it will make manipulating our modified shape much easier. Shade smooth to make the bullet look nice. If you recall our first example with the cylinder, we were locked into a shape with 32 sides. Right now, our bullet has 16 sides. Let's bump up its resolution to 32 using the Screw modifier's viewport step setting. This is what I love most about Nitrox 3D. I have complete control over my shape's dimensions and properties. If I need 64 sides, or even 8, no problem. Right now, our bullet has some sharp edges where it shouldn't. Let's tab into Edit mode and adjust the properties of a few vertices so we can strategically apply some bevels. First, let's use the Viewport Vis button to disable the effect of the modifiers in the viewport. If you don't have this button, enable Blender's included Modifier Tools add-on in your preferences. To control the curvature of the bullet projectile, we will use a bevel weight under the Vertex Data section of the selected vertex's item panel. Bevel weights are a way of balancing the effect of a bevel across multiple vertices using a value between 0 and 1. We want the projectile's bevel to round the overall shape. But we want to give the tip a slightly rounded edge. So let's start with a bevel weight of 1 for the lower vert and 0.25 for the vert above it. We also want to slightly round the edges at the neck and rim of the cartridge. To do this, we will add a second bevel with fixed dimensions, rather than a balanced outcome based on bevel weights. Let's select the relevant vertices and assign them to a vertex group called Softer. With that done, we tab back into Object Mode, turn Viewport Visibility back on, and add the necessary bevel modifiers. First, we add a bevel for the projectile. Move it to the top of the stack. Set the bevel type to vertices and limit method to weight. Our bullet is quite small, so turn off clamp overlap so we can see the true effect of our settings. Change segments to 8 and reduce the amount. If you get a crazy shape, enable the Calculate Order setting under the Screw modifier's Normals section. We can perfect the projectile shape now. First, increase the bevel modifier amount. Next, tab into Edit mode. Select the vertex on the side of the projectile's tip and decrease the bevel weight to tighten the topmost bevel. Finally, move the vertices a little to refine the projectile shape further. Next, we will add a second bevel for the cartridge. Choose a limit method of vertex group. I started tweaking settings before selecting the Softer vertex group, so things look a bit crazy when I disabled clamp overlap, changed the number of segments, and adjusted the amount. But once the Softer vertex group is selected, it's easy to perfect the bevel. Our bullet looks great, but it needs something else to be realistic, a primer at its base. If we were dealing with a cylinder for a base object, we would need to inset a face and create a circular gully around the primer with some extrusions. If we did not get it right the first time, we would need to select and move a bunch of edges around manually. With Nitrox 3D, we just tab into Edit mode, add a couple more vertices, and position them as needed. The easiest way to do this is select and subdivide the edge where the new vertices should appear, then move the vertices using the G key or a gizmo. I want to bevel the edges where the primer and cartridge meet, so I assign the vertices on the outside of the inset to a new vertex group called Primer. Tabbing back to Object Mode, I add another bevel modifier. It's like the bevel on the Softer vertex group, so I duplicate that bevel, move it up, and adjust the values so it rounds the edges of the primer. Things look a bit tight, so I tab back into Edit mode. The vertices on side of the primer are still selected, so I can easily move them in a bit. Now, the bullet looks great. I like to model without tracing reference images, because it forces me to think about scale and proportion. But sometimes, I need to reproduce an object's shape and scale perfectly. Let's add a reference image to the scene and see how easy it is to change up our original Nitrox 3D bullet. Okay, so I searched the internet, got the exact dimensions of 3 different bullets, and made some outlines in Adobe Illustrator. After adding the reference image to the scene, I reset its rotation with Alt+R, rotated it by 90 on the X, moved it backwards, and aligned the outline of the first bullet with the world origin. To change my rough bullet into a Soviet 7.62 round, all I need to do is toggle viewport visibility on the modifier stack, tab into Edit mode, and move the various vertices so they line up with the outline. I can refine the shape by adding extra vertices, if needed, or I can change bevel weights and vertex group assignments as required. In this case, I will assign the bottom corner vertex to a vertex group called 45 deg and use a one-segment bevel to chamfer the bottom of the bullet's rim. While making the bullet, it occurred to me that some people might want to have a separate projectile. Well, that's no problem. Tab into Edit Mode, select the vertices that make up the projectile and hit P to separate by selection. Go back into Object Mode and select the separated projectile edge. Notice that all the modifiers have been copied to the separated object. That's handy. Leave them for now, we will delete what we don't need later. Tab back into Edit Mode and extrude and move the lowest vertex down a couple of times to give the bullet a tail. Back in Object Mode, delete the unneeded bevel modifiers for the primer and the chamfer on the rim. In Edit Mode, delete the corresponding vertex groups and assign the vertices on the edges of the projectile tail to the softer vertex group. Tab to Object Mode. The projectile looks great. If you separate geometry like we have just done, be sure to parent the projectile to the cartridge, if you want them to stay together when the cartridge is moved. In the next section of the video, I will make the bigger bullets using a duplicate of the 7.62 Soviet. It's a pretty simple process, and I don't want to bore you, so I will outline the process in time-lapse. But the steps are as follows: duplicate the original bullet using the duplicate object command in the object menu. Now, hide the duplicate. Select both the original and the reference image, then drag them to the side. Drag enough so the reference image lines up perfectly with the duplicate bullet standing at the world origin. Hide the original and show the duplicate. Rename the duplicate so you can easily distinguish it from the original. Scale the new bullet and position its vertices so they line up with the outline. Adjust the first bevel modifier so the projectile has the correct curve. Refine the design further using the settings on the existing bevel modifiers, or create new ones as needed. In the case of the M789 round, the design requires numerous additional vertices to be added to facilitate the crimping at its neck, and the raised area above its rim. The easiest way to do this is to select the nearest edge in Edit Mode and use the Subdivide command in the Edge menu. Increment the number of cuts as needed. If you add too many vertices, just dissolve what you don't need. Rearrange the vertices as needed. When placing vertices, be mindful of the fact you have a Solidify modifier in action. Where vertices that form an inset like the ring around the primer or the two ridges near the M789 projectile's tip are quite close together, give them a bit of extra space. Something to be mindful of when working with live modifiers is the effect of unapplied changes to scale. After creating the two additional bullets, I recalled that the scale was not 1.0, so I hit Ctrl+A to bring up the Apply menu and applied both rotation and scale. This had two unintended side effects. The bevels on the projectile became more compressed, and the effect of the Solidify modifier seemed to be diminished. Correcting these issues only took a couple of quick tweaks, but, from now on, I will always work with 1.0 scale. Also, be sure to check your geometry up close. Often, problems can escape detection when the model is viewed in solid mode. Small changes to the settings on the screw, solidify and bevel modifiers can radically affect the geometry. Likewise, the position of an object's vertices relative to its origin will greatly affect the screw modifier. Always check what your modifiers are doing in wireframe mode with X-ray enabled. For an object that should not have connected inner and outer surfaces, be sure to disable rim fill in the Solidify modifier settings, and use screw merge to remove unnecessary geometry where possible. Get to know how the modifiers interact by playing with the settings, such as bevel width, solidify thickness, and screw merge distance. If things don't look right, undo your changes and try again. These are the final settings for the modifiers on the 6 objects that make up the 3 bullets. Notice that the rim fill is disabled for all 3 projectiles and that screw merge is enabled for all. Solidify thickness and screw merge distance also varies. These settings are the product of just a few minutes tweaking and experimentation. The bullets look good, but they could be improved with some finishing touches, such as marking some edges sharp to enhance their shading. To do that, I will need to apply the screw modifier to get access to the edges. But maybe I will want to make some big changes later, so I will duplicate the general collection, rename it to templates, hide that collection, and rename the new collection to final. For each bullet in the final collection, I will apply all modifiers because I'm feeling lazy. Once the modifiers are applied, I can tab to Edit Mode and mark the necessary edges as sharp, using the Mark Sharp command in the Edge menu. A couple of the edges, like those above the rim, have enough angle to not require Mark Sharp, but it does not hurt to mark them sharp anyway. I also think a bevel would look nice on the neck of the 50 BMG, so I use a mean bevel weight on the edge and add a bevel modifier with a type of edges, and limit method of weight selected. Finally, I tab into edit mode for each object and hit the 3 key to run a machine tools cleanup. It will delete any unnecessary geometry that the merge setting on the screw modifier did not catch. This is another invaluable tool. I use it all the time to sanity check my designs. Well, that's the structure of my objects finished. I hope you can see the power of Nitrox 3D and visualize how it can benefit your workflow. Now, I'm going to add some awesome materials to the bullets using one of Chip Walter's EV Plus materials. First, I need to add a backdrop and light my scene. The backdrop is just the classic infinity wall made with a plane with a beveled edge and some smooth shading. My world has a pure black background and no lights, so enabling scene lights and world lights under viewport shading settings turns everything black. The first thing I do is add 3-point lights using the included Tri-Lighting add-on. I love this add-on because it gives me a basic lighting rig that features a track to constraint on each light to make it always point at a certain object. But having all lights pointing to the same spot doesn't work great for 3 bullets, so I create a couple of empties and update the track to constraints on the lights to use them. This will help me illuminate the edge of the M789 bullet, while pointing the key and fill lights towards the middle bullet. The Tri-Lighting add-on also created a 50mm camera. I hit 0 to look through the camera, then temporarily enable lock camera to view in the view settings. This allows me to drag the view into alignment with the camera. After some brief adjustments to the lights to line up and soften the shadows, I am ready to apply some materials. First up, I will use KitOps to add some desert camo to the backdrop using the CW Camo material. KitOps is a Chip Walters product. It's an extremely powerful tool for your non-destructive hard surface modeling workflow. It has both free and pro versions. In this video, I will use it exclusively as a source of materials, but I strongly encourage you to check it out. CW Camo and the CW Hero material, which I will discuss shortly, are part of a paid Chip Walters product called EV Plus Materials. These materials are worth every penny. There are hundreds to choose from, and some include node groups to add such things as dirt, scratches, bevels and worn edges. CW Camo looks great using the default settings, so I don't bother opening the shader editor. But here's what the settings look like, if you are interested. Next, I will use another material, called CW Hero, for all the bullets. CW Hero is a beta material that will be added to EV Plus materials in the near future. I want to give each bullet a different look, so I control-click the Add Material button in KitOps to give each bullet a unique copy of the CW Hero material. Once I've added the default CW Hero material to each bullet, I open my shader editor to improve the world lighting. As I mentioned before, my default world is just a black background. The string of nodes on the bottom left is an abandoned Slipway HDRI setup that came from a Blender Brothers video. It's great for modeling, but it's too bright for this scene, so I won't use it. The nodes at the top came from one of the videos in Chip's Nitrox 3D course. It adds some nice studio-style light to my scene, so I use it to soften my basic lighting. Starting with the 7.62 Soviet round, I give the projectile a dark brassy color and crank up the metallic setting on the principled BSDF. I make the scratches similar to the base color, but a touch lighter, and adjust the dirt so it is brown, and less intense. I follow a similar process for the cartridge, but leave it quite dirty. For the primer, I add a second material slot to the cartridge and select the 762 projectile material. Going back to viewport shading mode, I tab into edit mode and select the faces of the primer, then assign them to slot 2 in the shader editor. Next, I repeat the process for the 50 BMG, but make both the projectile and casing much shinier and cleaner. When setting the colors, I just toy around with it quickly to get something that looks pretty close, rather than plug in some perfectly matched color values. The M789 cartridge was just a few quick tweaks of the default settings. However, the projectile involved 3 material slots, each with a variation of the CW Hero material. The tip is almost lead-like and the ring beneath it quite brassy. The base of the projectile needed a sweep of yellow paint on dark grayish-green, so I selected the principled BSDF and hit Ctrl-T to add a texture setup. I replaced the image texture with a gradient texture and used a color ramp to create the yellow band. Finally, I adjusted the lights a touch to make the lighting more consistent. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. In the next video, I will make something more substantial using Nitrox 3D and some other techniques. Until then, keep safe and have fun modeling with Blender.